Slocum in the morning on 1340 WJOL.
It is a Wednesday just after 12 noon. This is 1340 WJOL. Good afternoon, I should say. Boy, I sit here every morning. Every time I do anything afternoon, first time I say good something or other, it's followed by morning. Mark Batinick is here, State Representative, 97th District, Policy Nuance. This is, show number 4 or 5. Representative Batinick, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you as always, and it is show number 4. I know we're going through them quickly, but we're still on show number 4.
See, time flies, doesn't it?
It does fly.
It does. Well, good to have you aboard. There's really not much to get to today, so I'm joking, of course. There's so much going on. The energy bill, there's stuff going on, the governor, COVID, vaccines, mandates. Oh, I think you'll be happy to know that Will County, the Republicans, the Democrats are now arguing over the vaccine mandate as well. Makes you feel like you're not on an island, right?
I'm not on an island. Seems like it's the national argument, actually. So we'll just all join in the fray, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to talk to Representative Batinick about, first of all, the energy bill. Then he just got back from Georgia and noticed some different things about how they operate as opposed to how we do things in Springfield. And then we're going to talk about COVID, the governor's response, and we have some questions as well. If you'd like to email us a question, you can do so. And that email address is?
IllinoisQuestions@gmail.com. I know we had a lot that come in. Feel free, even after the show, if you're listening to this on the podcast, if you email us after the show, we'll try to get your question the next week, or I'll get back to you personally.
Okay. And I think, some point, and if you want to do it today, we can do it as well, or some point in the future, since we're live and on the air right now, we can take some phone calls if people would like to call in. They're more than welcome to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's what I really appreciate this, and I'm not, blowing smoke or anything, but, a lot of politicians be like, no, we don't want to take phone calls. But you told me from the very get-go that people want to call up, and I don't care if they don't like me, they completely disagree with me, let's talk it out. So I appreciate that.
Yep. Hence the name Nuance. It's I was actually talking to your producer beforehand, and he was even noticing everything is kind of in the two camps. You're either all for everything, all for every mandate and every vaccine, or you're completely against it. And there's not enough conversation about the nuance things in the middle. And we're going to get through some of those things today, and we have in the past. So if you haven't listened to any of the podcasts, they are available at repbatnick.com. You can go onto my webpage and listen to episodes 1, 2, and 3. But we'll get going on episode 4 here.
All right, let's do it. Let's rock and roll. So 815-254-7300 is the number. If you want to jump in with anything, if we have time, we will get you on the air. We're going to start, obviously, with the big news of the week, this week, and last, the energy bill.
Can we jump in something real quick before that?
Sure.
So just so listeners probably don't know, I prepare the clock, and I wanted to squeeze something in earlier. The first thing was the energy bill. But the big news from yesterday was California with the recall.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sure. With the recall amendment. And I am the reason I wanted to bring it up timely, I'm a huge proponent of recall. But I don't think a state could come up with a worse way to do a recall than the way California has modeled their recall amendment. Are you familiar with how the process works?
Somewhat, yeah, I am. I've been following it very closely.
So essentially, and this is my understanding, you gather the signatures, and it's a special election. And if the governor doesn't get 50% support, then it goes to the second question on the ballot, which might be a dozen, 20, 30. It could be a ton of other people on the ballot. So essentially, the governor could have 49% support and be replaced with somebody that has 20% support, which is really a silly way to do it. I introduced a House Joint Constitutional Amendment in the spring, and the way ours worked was dramatically differently. One of the things that's bad about the way some of the recalls are often done is they're done for partisan political purposes, and I don't think that's the point. I think the point of doing a recall is when you have malfeasance. And it's also one of the underplayed things about having a recall system is you don't want to do it, but it's a check and balance on the people in office. So the way we modeled, I did it with Senator Jason Barrickman. He filed the similar language with the Senate amendment. And the way we did it were a couple things. Number one, if the person were to be recalled, they would simply be replaced following the normal procedures that are in place for replacing somebody. So in California, there was Governor Newsom, and then there was a whole host of other people running for governor. Well, the way we would do it here, if there was a recall, the lieutenant governor would become the new governor. Right. So when Blagojevich was governor, if the citizens had enough earlier, kind of took the General Assembly a while to act, just the normal process. So you couldn't do it to try to change the party structure or the political leanings of the state. The purpose is just to remove somebody. Another thing we did that was unique that isn't in any of the recalls that we've been able to find studying was our recall proposal has a 60% threshold. I mean, you look at Joe Biden's approval ratings today, the average on Real Clear Politics is below 50%. That doesn't mean necessarily he should be recalled after less than a year and move on to somebody else. There needs to be an overwhelming response of the public where the public says, hey, this guy isn't doing his job. He needs to be removed. And I look at it more where the recall really should be used is those local elections. So we had in our district, we had a highway commissioner, beginning of a long-term 4-year term, was doing his job from Florida and hiring out his job back home. And obviously one of the most important things a highway commissioner does at the township level here in this part of Illinois is deal with snow.
Yeah, that's right.
And the people should have the ability to recall that individual and let that individual be replaced as opposed to having to wait 4 years. So, I mean, you have people who have 6-year terms. You have all these small situations locally that there's a very good reason, and it shouldn't be done for partisan purposes. And lastly, the other thing we did is we didn't make it a special election. So there would be a signature period that was pretty robust, but the recall election would be held at the next scheduled statewide election.
Okay.
So your primary day, your general election, and your consolidated general election. And the point of that is cost. There's no reason to put extra cost on the taxpayers. And if you're already holding an election, the cost is nominal, if anything. So I hope this isn't what happened in California. I think there was nearly $250 million spent between campaigning and everything else. I hope this isn't a push against recall, because I think if we're going to do ethics in Illinois, something that would bring trust to the voters of Illinois is if we said, hey, we want you to be able to hire us. We want you also to be able to fire us. Sure. And that's all I'm asking for. So I just wanted to touch upon that, and then we can go ahead and get into energy.
No, I think that makes sense. I really do, because, yeah, you're right. You are changing the parties altogether, and that doesn't seem fair. I mean, when you lose, you lose. You take your medicine and deal with it and move on. But, yeah, just to get rid of a guy for the sake of getting rid of a guy, even though I think Gavin Newsom has done a horrible job in California, he's in a horrible state, he still won, and then beat him next time.
Beat him next time.
Beat him next time. All right, well, let's talk about the energy bill. This is so hard for the average person to wrap their head around. How do you guys do it?
A 1,000-page bill that's changing with amendments. The day that we're doing it, it is it's difficult. And in fact, if you listen to debate, and this is no criticism of the sponsor, but couldn't remember if it was 700 million or 600 million or 800 million. There were some small things, or the sponsor will get asked questions about the bill of. I think we talked offline about there's an electric vehicle incentive of $4,000 that was put into the bill, but it's only for certain counties and a few townships. It wasn't statewide. And if you listen to debate, the sponsor didn't really recognize that or remember that. They had to go through it. So it's hard for anybody when the sponsor's having a hard time understanding every aspect of the bill. It's certainly hard for members who are working on other things and just voting on it to understand everything of the bill. So, you got to trust staff. You have to look at some of the biggest points in the bill. But I can tell you it's difficult. And one of the hardest things about this job is you really have to. You're voting on a whole bunch of different things.
Oh yeah.
I mean, from healthcare to capital to roads and bridges to education to curriculum for students to just a whole host of things. And for anybody to say that they're an expert on all those things, I think is, they're kidding themselves.
Yeah.
We're certainly stretched them. We're a mile wide and an inch deep. But you have to kind of use some basic things that you go to in your basic principles to try and come up with what is the right vote. And a lot of times, a lot of people say vote your district. And even then, sometimes the vote for your district is there's cross currents where maybe it's long-term bad for your district and maybe short-term good for your district. I think in this case, there are certainly people in my district that benefited by this bill, but there's some long-term consequences of the bill that I'm really concerned about.
There are. That's why you have to weigh it. That's the difficult part of this. So the overall cost was how many hundreds of millions of dollars?
$700 million a year,
Right.
partially over 5 years. The subsidies are over 5 years, but something that didn't come up during debate, which was in the other bill and isn't in this bill, and nobody really caught it, is most of the provisions aren't sunsetted in this. So usually when we do something like that, there's a sunset. So there's a sunset for, we'll call it the nuke bailout, keeping the 2 plants open, but there isn't a sunset provision for the other aspects of the bill.
Okay. How much of the bill was nukes?
20%.
20%.
20%.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So 80% of the bill was other stuff, and certainly stuff that I took issue with the way that it was laid out. And that's the hard part. Whenever you talk about jobs in your district, it's hard to vote against something like that. But at some point, we have to start looking at the whole instead of the parts.
Yeah. What were some of the things that if people heard, which they will now, they'll be upset about?
Well, it's interesting. We've heard this. There's this push downstate, and they always talk about there's a downstate versus Chicago sort of dynamic. One of the small things in the bill was just that you get the electric vehicle credit if you're in. It's, Will County, DuPage, Lake, all those. And then they added a few townships, one in Grundy, and they added the Oswego Township of Kendall that get this credit. Now, I think there's some difference in who's paying for that and what electric bill it is going on and whatnot, but it certainly causes a us versus them divide. I think the other part that's really, really important is we talked about this briefly in the last episode. We have 2 regions of electricity. There's essentially 2 grids. So most of Chicagoland is in the PJM grid, which goes all the way to New Jersey.
Okay. And
that's where most of the nukes are. And in terms of energy cost and energy supply, it's going to be pretty stable because of those nukes. It's one of the things that's been a strong point for Illinois. The MISO region is basically western, southern, and central Illinois, and it grabs a little bit of Texas, but is mainly Louisiana all the way up to Manitoba.
Okay.
The difference there is there's 1 nuclear plant. And what this bill is going to do is this bill is going to close a lot of the power that is generated in the MISO region. So where PJM exports power to the rest of the grid, the MISO region imports power. And probably the biggest frustrating thing I have is, there's a lot of people congratulating themselves in terms of green energy and all this stuff, but my concern is that in MISO, there's going to be dramatic increases in rates, and businesses just aren't going to eat that. And we are going to be closing gas peaker plants. So the gas peaker plants are likely going to close by about 2030, based on what's in the bill. And the gas peaker plants create about as much electricity as the nuclear fleet does.
Wow.
So they're a little bit over 10,000. I think the term is megawatts. Sorry if I messed that up. 10.5, and then the nukes are about 11.5, somewhere in that range. So they're close. Now, to be clear, the peaker plants are used peak time. Air conditioning's going on, hot time, all that stuff. So where the nuclear plants are for that stable electricity, the peaker plants are for the peak times. The issue that I have is now we are going to be importing electricity from places like Missouri and Indiana and closing jobs. So we're going to pay more for electricity, and we're going to be importing. If you're concerned about CO2 output, we're not getting rid of it. We're importing it, right? And the bigger issue I really have is that you're going to be taking manufacturing that could be in downstate and central Illinois, and I've already heard from plants and things that we're looking to go online that are going to be scrapped now because of this bill, and those are jobs, and those jobs are important to everybody in the state. You might be moving that manufacturing to Indiana, Missouri. You might be moving it to India and China. And if we're going to attack energy seriously in this country, one, we have to do it nationally. I'm not sure why Illinois ratepayers should be paying for grids that go from here to New Jersey or Louisiana, Manitoba. But more importantly, the best thing that we can do is better trade agreements. I mean, the fact that they're building hundreds of coal-fired plants in China, and they don't have a great history on pollution. And so the idea of just moving jobs out of the state and moving electrical production out of the state to other states where we can't control it, and possibly to other countries where we really can't control it, I don't believe is in the best interest of the state. So that's really, in terms of what it's going to do for the environment, we can't get too far ahead of ourselves. And one of the things we always look at buckets, and businesses look at buckets when they're moving to a state. They look at, if you're going to be a manufacturer, you're going to look at electrical costs, you're going to look at property taxes, you're going to look at corporate taxes, you're going to look at job costs, you're going to look at all those things. And when you raise one, another one has to go down for that business to stay in the state. And if we're going to be serious in this state about clean energy, and if we want people to pay more for clean energy, well then you have to bring your work comp costs down. You have to bring make the regulatory environment a little bit better. You need to bring taxes down and not have the pension obligation that you have. So all these things that make it harder to have a business in Illinois makes it harder to be at the forefront of green energy. So certain states, if they have everything and that they want to push the envelope on green energy, they can do that because people have other reasons to come and stay there. We're losing all those advantages that we have, and that's one of the big reasons I had an issue with the bill. The other half is there's nearly $200 million a year in what they call equity, and Illinois does not have a good history in terms of spending money on programs like this, and this is one of those things that doesn't have a sunset. So $200 million a year, I'm concerned, will just fall into either waste. We've heard about waste and weatherization programs. We've heard about waste where people were paid to march in parades and all these different things. It's interesting. One of the downs, actually part of the western part of the state, guys got up and spoke after one of the Democrats spoke in favor of this bill about how they were going to build new trade schools to help the conversion from coal to solar and all this stuff, and they were going to build these new schools in the city. Another Democrat who voted against the bill talked about how there already are schools in the city. We should just be not building new buildings, use the old ones. Which I agree, but more importantly, let's think about this. The coal plants are downstate. If you're going to build a trade school to convert coal to solar, then shouldn't those schools be where coal is as opposed to upstate in Chicago? So to wrap it all up, this is a $700 million annual bill, and to kind of put a percentage on it, we need about $2 billion a year to really quarantine our pension obligation payment and transition into real property tax relief. We need about a $2 million marker, right? I have a bill. That's about what we need. We need about $2 billion. So this is a third of solving those two major problems. This bill alone costs a third of it. Does it cost all of it? No, it doesn't. It doesn't take care of the cost of all of it, but it takes care of a third of it. And when I see bill after bill after bill that adds up, we need to take care of those other priorities first. So I've been on record. I wanted the nukes to stay open. I was really hoping for a bill I could vote for. Last thing I'll leave with on this is, ComEd is obviously an Exelon. They're embroiled in the scandal with the former speaker and how the other nuke bailout went down. My understanding from some of the lobbyists were two things. One, there were other energy suppliers that were willing to buy those nuke plants as is because they wanted it to be part of their fleet. Some people have said maybe that's not true. Maybe it is. This much I know, they haven't offered those for sale leading up to this. More importantly, I was told, well, they opened their books. They can't open their books to show they're losing money because of bonding rules and whatnot. But they did open their books up to the governor. Well, they didn't open their books up to me and the legislator and people are voting on it. So if we're going to make a decision, if somebody is involved in a scandal after a $2.35 billion bailout, if they're involved in a scandal after that, and they're coming to us and ask for more money, they have to be more transparent about why they're coming and what they're going to do and why they need the money. So because of all of that, it was a tough vote, and that's why I was a no. I'm going to ask you a question. Well, John's going to ask you a question. Again, you can email us illinoisquestions@gmail.gov. This is Policy Nuance with State Representative Mark Batinick. This is Mr. Batinick. This is from John. I'm a constituent from Shorewood and a power plant worker at one of the nuclear power plants affected by the recently passed bipartisan energy bill. I watched you vote no last Thursday. And again, you probably answered already this, but just kind of wrapping this up with this question. I was quite disappointed. I realized that no law is perfect, and this was a large bill that necessarily means there will be some parts we can disagree with. I want
to know if you felt a no vote best served your constituents and why. I believe if this bill had not passed, 2 nuclear plants would close in the near future, and we would lose many good jobs in the area and immediately start producing more pollution in order to replace the lost generation with coal and natural gas power plants. Now, you kind of answered that already, but directly to John?
Yeah, some of it. And I've gotten calls from people that work there as well, and I actually spoke to somebody just yesterday on it and wanted to know what my thought process was, and she was kind. It was great, and this is why I love giving my phone number out and doing stuff like this, because after I explained it, I think she understood. She read the bill. She said, yeah, it really wasn't a great bill. One, I believe it's in the best interest of the United States to keep those plants open. I don't believe that they were going to close. My one concern, the biggest concern I had going into this, was that you have a very large company that could be playing poker, where they could say, "Hey, we're gonna use Byron as a pawn, possibly close it, because we know that'll guarantee maybe better bailouts, because we'll go to other states that have nuclear power, or we'll go back to Illinois and say, we did it once, we're willing to do it again." And the fact that there's a scandal involved in this is tough for me to swallow. I really don't like playing poker with people's lives. I'm a little disappointed that the federal government didn't get involved a little bit faster, a little bit earlier. Yeah. As I said on the front end, these plants don't serve Illinois; they serve the PJM. They serve all the way to Jersey. So I hear you. Long term, this is one of those bills that's going to create some effects that people won't be able to connect the dots and tie back. So one of the things that was in this bill was they're putting most of the cost onto commercial users as opposed to residents. And to me, that's just a way of hiding the true cost.
Sure.
They did this in Cook County with property taxes, where I grew up. I talked about it in a previous episode. So decades ago, businesses just slowly started bleeding. Jobs started leaving, and then the residents' property taxes went up. There was job loss. And it's hard to equate job loss. I can tell you, it was a hard vote to vote no. The easy vote politically was to vote yes.
Absolutely.
Right? I don't think when FIJA passed last time, I talked to a downstate constituent. He said, I never got one negative call about FIJA, which was the previous version of this bill about 5 years ago. Would have made a whole lot of people happy, would have made unions happy. Obviously, the people that directly tied to it were happy, but this certainly was far from a perfect bill. And we as a state need to do better. And when we get into the Georgia stuff, I'll actually talk about that a little bit, about how we do things that.
Well, let's go there right now. Again, Policy Nuance with State Representative Martin Batinick from the 97th District. We're at 815-254-7300 or IllinoisQuestions@gmail.com. Now, you just went down for a couple of days down to Georgia. I love the state. I go down there about twice a year. It's beautiful. It is a lot different than it is here, politically, especially, is what you noticed.
Yeah, and some of it wasn't even so much. Obviously, people know the RD difference, but there was something really unique. It was a father-son trip. My son, God bless him, somehow became an Eagles fan, and he lives in Chicago, looking to move to the Southeast, but he's an Eagles fan. And we used to take short road trips to St. Louis, or if the Eagles were in Chicago or something like that, and see the Eagles play. So he bought me tickets to the Eagles Falcons game, and we flew in. And we took a really early flight because I'm cheap, and that's when the flights are cheap. And we landed, and he wanted to blow some time. He said, "Let's look at the Capitol." I got to be honest, I didn't remember that the Capitol was in Atlanta. I said, "Okay." So we went to the Capitol, and they usually have it a little bit more open, and the doors to both the Senate and House chambers were shut. And I went into the office of the Senate president. I said, "Hey, I'm from Illinois. We're just visiting, yada, yada, yada." And the guy said, "Oh, they're doing a mock session, and they should be almost done, but, we can go talk, and maybe I can get you on the floor." And then he started asking me about Springfield. And I said, "Well, I'm actually an Illinois state rep." And we started talking about the Springfield Capitol and whatnot. But after chit-chatting for a while, he said, "Hey, I'll take you over to the Senate." So he brought me over to the Secretary of the Senate. So it's like the clerk of the House, the same version as him. And they were finishing their mock session. Great guy. And he was telling me about a couple of things that I think are just fantastic that Georgia does. That is really nonpartisan, but tells a little bit about the way they conduct business. The first one is shorter session, 40 days, starts in January. You meet, you have a 1 week off, and you have weekends off in there, but it's a pretty short session. But I've advocated for something like this for a while. You come in for a week, you kind of get your busy work done. Mm-hmm. You immediately do the budget before doing anything else. There's none of this 11th hour, drop the budget May 31st. It is, we are not going to pass any legislation until the budget's done. And it just seems like such a great way in terms of the process of doing business and transparency to cover it. So budget's number one. And if you think about it, everything should roll off of the budget. You know, so much of what you can do is based on where spending is and your availability. So that I thought that was incredibly different and good. And I remember during the budget crisis, we were going down to Springfield. We were never talking about the budget. We were talking about all kinds of different bills, never talking about the budget. And the fact that they make it a priority, I think, is really important.
Yeah, they're putting the horse before the cart, not the cart before the horse.
There you go. And then the last one is really symbolic, but it was funny. I started to think about it. He said, so he brought me in because they were doing this mock session. They had a new computer system. He said, okay, we're about to do sine die. And I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's SINE and then capital DIE. It's Latin. It means the end. So what they do, their House and their Senate is across from the rotunda, similar to the way ours is. They open the doors so that they can see each other, and they try to bang the gavels at exactly the same time. Now, the importance of this is, going back to the budget, is that means that the House and Senate have to be working on everything together. Now, if you get the budget out of the way first, it makes it a lot easier. But there's been so many times where it happened with energy, and I think it happened with budget this year as well, but it happened with the energy bill this year and budget previously, where one chamber or the other just sends a bill to the Senate, or Senate sends a bill to us, and they say, we're going to let them take it up, and we're leaving, and we're out of town, and we're done. And you know, Georgia's controlled, the House and Senate are controlled by Republicans. The House and Senate in Illinois are controlled by Democrats. So it's the same party. You would think, I would understand it would be harder if you had different parties, but you would think having the House and Senate controlled by Democrats that we could have the kind of camaraderie or working together coordination where we could end each session at the same moment, but we don't do that. So I thought those two things were pretty striking.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of striking, you got to see a couple of really cool stadiums, right?
I did.
Mercedes-Benz. For those who don't know, Atlanta built a new stadium. Probably it's been open for about 3 years, I think. Maybe a year or two longer than that. It is everything that we don't have here in Chicago in terms of a stadium.
Yeah, boy, and this goes back to, I'm actually going to, in a way, tie this to the energy bill. I've been to a few stadiums. I don't get to see a lot, but Mercedes-Benz Stadium, where the Falcons play, is gorgeous. And when I first ran for office, even doing this show, people said don't do it. When I first ran for office, I put together a 39-page plan of all the things we need to do to fix the state. And one of the examples I used was Soldier Field. We spent over $700 million building Soldier Field. Lucas Oil Field was built for about $700 million, like a year or two later. Now, this is where the importance come in. I always talk about how it's not what you spend, it's the results of what you spend. Because a lot of people say, you know, your budget is your priorities, your budget is your priorities. We all see people in life spend a lot of money on things and not have a lot to show for it. And that's kind of how I feel about Soldier Field. And here's the economic impact, and this is what's important. I'm going to use Lucas Oil Field, but it transitions
which is in
Indianapolis. Yep. So Lucas Oil Field has hosted a Super Bowl. I'm going from memory on this. I want to say their net economic impact was $350 million.
From the one game?
From the one game. Wow. And you can Google this. They've had 2 Final Fours. Net economic impact from those is $100 million. They get the Big Ten championship every year, which obviously has a huge net economic impact. So you look at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. They're getting a Super Bowl. They get the SEC championship. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Deb on the computer over there can see if Mercedes-Benz Stadium is scheduled for a final for a Final Four for the NCAA basketball tournament. But I'm sure that there's a good chance the SEC basketball tournament is there occasionally. But the point is, we don't get those in Chicago, so we spent a lot of money to renovate a stadium that doesn't get the kind of return, and we did because the way we negotiated it, right? We negotiated something that wasn't in the best interest of maybe the citizens of the state. It might have been in the best interest of the parties that were involved directly in it, whether it be the workers, the hotels, or
the park district or whatever,
the park district, the Bears, whatever. But it certainly wasn't in the best interest of the state, and those are the kind of things that are the most frustrating. The fact that you have a retractable dome stadium in Milwaukee, and you have Indianapolis, that Super Bowl, Final Fours, Big Ten championship. The Big Ten championship needs to be in Chicago
every year.
Every year it should be. This should be the center. I mean, if just think about it. I mean, I believe this is where the Big Ten headquarters is, right?
It is up in Rosemont.
So and we get stuff. I think we've had the draft here recently. When the weather's nice. I mean, we get stuff like that. But if you're going to get those big events, you need to have a world-class stadium. We paid for a world-class stadium. Yeah. We didn't get a world-class stadium
at the time. That was the most expensive stadium ever built. And then a few years later, Jerry Jones built his AT&T Stadium in Dallas, which was, I think, $1.2 billion. Now, SoFi Stadium just opened up, and I think it was like $2 or $3 billion out in LA. All right, so let me ask you a question. I got one here for you right here. I didn't send this to illinoisquestions@gmail.gov, but would you be in favor of helping out the Bears if they wanted to move to Arlington, if you saw a return on the investment?
Yeah, I'm a numbers guy. In fact, one of my new phrases that we're going to roll into with COVID is math over emotion.
Yep.
The trouble I have with Arlington Heights is it's Arlington Heights.
Right.
You look at the stadium. Lucas Oil Field is downtown Indianapolis. You look at Atlanta. It's downtown Atlanta for Mercedes-Benz Stadium, built in something in Arlington Heights. I'm not sure that's going to draw a Super Bowl. I'm not sure it's going to draw. It's going to draw the NIT. Kind of one of the if you look at the way we. If anything, Soldier Field probably should have been where the Sox play. You get 81 games a year. People go out. They go to a bar afterwards. They drink. There's more dates and there's more spending that's ancillary to the game itself. So the site would have to be important. I would support doing something to have a world-class stadium in Chicago, but my gut tells me Arlington Heights isn't it. So.
Good point. Schaumburg just doesn't have that same feel as the Loop, does it?
Right. It does not.
You got it. Policy Nuance with State Representative Mark Batinick. We've covered the energy bill. We've covered the California recall and the trip to Georgia. Now let's move on to COVID. The governor received a letter from you, I'm thinking going on 3 weeks ago. We talked to you last week about it. You had not heard back from him yet. Have you, as of this afternoon here at 12:40?
Yeah, he actually sent me. I got an email from him with the letter a couple hours after our last show.
Good.
So
okay.
So yeah, and it's posted on our Facebook page, and it was thoughtful. I'm glad. I think we flushed out a few things even by having this little public banter. I'll read a couple quotes that I highlighted here. To remind everybody, I asked for two things. I asked for one, metrics on mass. And then I asked for smaller regions, and he kind of responded to both. First on the mask mandate, he says, as for the statewide indoor mask mandate, I have repeatedly said that once Illinois has established a consistent downward trend on this current wave, we could reevaluate what the current recommendations are from the CDC and return mask to recommendations instead of a mandate. So what I'm basically reading there is he didn't want to get boxed into any specific metrics. He has metrics. He's not sharing them. Fair enough. Maybe they'll change a little bit based on what's happening with COVID.
Yeah, because he did once before. Remember the 6.5 and then the 8%. And
right.
As soon as we hit 8, boom. So now I guess the gray area suits him a little bit better.
Right, and it does. It certainly gives you more wiggle room. The other part was I really wanted more localized metrics, and one of the reasons for having localized metrics is I actually think it's a better way to manage mitigation. So if you have a county that has an outbreak, you're going to notice that outbreak earlier than if it's tied to a bigger region. And the way I wanted to do it is I understand the county is influenced by areas around it. So my idea was to use a county and influencing factors of positivity from each rate that touches that county, right? Will's going to be influenced by Kendall. Kendall's going to be influenced by Will, Kankakee, and so on and so forth. His response, I'll just say I don't agree with, but I'll give his response. My administration has been guided by a focus on healthcare availability for all our state's residents, specifically guided by the IDPH Emergency Medical Service regions, with some minor adjustments as suggested by members of General Assembly last year. These are the same regions that set parameters for ambulance drivers and hospital collaborations. I think what I would say to that, if we were talking about this in committee, the regions for ambulance drivers aren't regions for how COVID spreads, right? I mean, you have these hard borders as opposed to kind of having overlapping borders. One of the things I brought up is we've had issues in the past where counties are on border states and the border state is having a big breakout that eventually filters its way to the Illinois side. Well, if we were using that influencing data, we would know about that sooner and maybe have better mitigation. So, I disagree with him on that. I'm glad I got something public. I will say that one of the things that he mentions in letter 2 is a significant availability and utilization of vaccines for school-age children under 12 and improving vaccination rates for children 12 to 17 would also make a big difference. So, and that's something I certainly want to get into with the data. He's really banking on the kids being vaccinated, and I have a whole bunch of data, and I got into a little bit of a back and forth with some people on my Facebook page about this. The vaccine for children is up in the air, especially those under 12.
Sure it is.
In fact, I just posted it right before I started the show. The UK has been really diligent about being cautious about vaccinating children. They only vaccinated their people down to 15. They didn't go to 12. They just added 12 to 15-year-olds. One of the unique things they do, though, is they only do a single dose. They don't do a double dose. And it goes to show you, because people say follow the science. Well, the data is certainly vastly different depending on. I shouldn't say the data is different. The approach is different depending on what country you're in. And they're good scientists and they're smart people, and there's reasons to have a nuanced debate. But in the Guardian, the most troubling sign I heard in the Guardian article that's linked, and I'm going to quote it right now. Offering vaccines to children could also help reduce the anxiety some children feel about COVID-19. Here's my issue with that.
Wow.
COVID-19 vaccination is not an antidepressant.
No.
And our kids should not be fearing this. In the Guardian article, I think they say 25 kids had passed due to COVID, which is, we've had 100 adolescents shot in the city of Chicago since COVID started, shot and killed in the city of Chicago. The risk to kids is very small, and I'm getting pushback from people that that want to use the term anti-vax. Certainly not anti-vax. I've talked about it on the show before. The math for me is really clear for adults that the risk of COVID is so great that getting the vaccine is certainly better. But if you go to the CD website and look at how this affects children, it's dramatically different for children than it is for adults. There was another post I had on my website was from MedPage Today, and I posted a few articles from MedPage Today, and the reason I did that was just to show that it's a data-based website. I think Media Bias Today calls it extremely pro-science. It had the highest ratings for credibility. Now, this was a June article, and people did bring that up, but there was a professor from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, reputable, MedPage Today, I would say reputable, and he looked at all the cases in the United States that he could find on COVID, and not a single childhood death went without a significant comorbidity. Okay, so now that was June. And I have had people say that, well, the world has changed since June. The biggest thing we know about Delta is that it's more contagious, not necessarily if you get it, it's worse. I haven't seen any data, and I'm open to it. If somebody were to show me data, say, here's the number of kids that are we need to do mass vaccinations for kids, and here's why there needs to be
because they're dying.
Right, because they're dying or having long COVID or whatever it is. We don't see that data. That data doesn't exist. And if you look at the Guardian article, it's very recent, and it talks about 25 kids total in the UK, which I believe is about 60 million people. Maybe Deb can look how much what the population of the UK is. So it's not a small country. It's about 5 times the size of 5 times the size of Illinois. So it is the ride to 67 million. So the ride to school may or could be, more dangerous than that to young kids and the risk of getting COVID. The other thing that we're finding more and more, and I talked about it. Actually, the study came out the day after our first episode. It does show that the immunity from getting it naturally is stronger than the COVID vaccine.
Right.
I'm going to be clear. I took the vaccine. I support the vaccine. But there was, I don't know if you saw, did you see the recent article in the Tribune about the school that's being closed for 14 days in the city of Chicago?
No. Is it one of the CPS schools?
I think it's a CPS. It's a charter school.
Okay.
But I do believe they are a CPS, or I do believe they're a CPU, Chicago Public Teachers Union, CTPU. School. Their memorandum of understanding stated that if there were 3 cases in the school in 3 different classrooms, they closed the entire school for 2 weeks. And this is where I get back to, we're putting so much on the kids. The kids, with the violence in Chicago, the what happens to kids when they don't go to school. I've talked about on the show before. My wife's a special ed teacher. She's at a lower income school. And for so many kids, the school is their safe haven.
That's it.
The school is where they get fed. The school is where they get loved. The school is everything. And I don't know if that's going to be the standard. Now, I know that's their memorandum of understanding. I don't know if each school has a different one. But if that's going to be the standard, that's going to be a difficult standard for the Chicago public schools to stay open very
impossible.
much. And the one thing we need to do this school year is keep the kids in school. We talked about in previous episodes about the life expectancy difference based on income group. For those of you who hadn't listened to those shows, and it's linked in a previous Facebook post, there's a 10 to 15 year life expectancy difference based on whether you're a female 10 years, male 15 years, based on the highest income group and lowest income groups. And the middle class, the income gap is growing. The middle class can afford a teacher. They're more likely to have loving homes and a healthy lunch and all those things. But families that are struggling, keeping kids out of school is dangerous to their health. I contend that keeping kids out of school at this point is more dangerous to their health
than COVID.
I mean, if you look at what's happened in the city of Chicago, Paul Vallis has been a big person on this. If you look at the very small handful of cases of what's happened in terms of kids and COVID and without comorbidities versus the violence and everything that's happened in Chicago, it's dramatic. Illinois just set a record for opioid deaths in 2020.
Yeah.
Right. These are tough decisions. So bring it all back to the vaccine and kids. When you read that Guardian article, a lot of the reasons for the kids taking the vaccine wasn't about keeping the kids healthy. It was about, well, we have these mitigations and they can't stay in school if they get COVID, so we should give them the vaccine so they can stay in school. These are conversations I'm happy to have. I'm happy to have them in a committee hearing. I'm happy to have them at the Capitol. I'm happy to have them in district. I'm happy to have them everywhere. I just don't want them dictated to me without a thorough conversation that we don't seem to be having.
Well, we have another question here, illinoisquestions@gmail.com. Donald said, Mr. Batinick, we voted you in to represent us. We wish the people we the people wish to have our Constitution followed. We are requesting you to address this BS mandate with the governor. Please reply. And I'm guessing it's basically similar to what you said. Things are mandates.
Yeah, things are mandates. There was are you familiar with JCAR?
I am.
Okay, you're a rarity.
I know.
Joint Commission on Administrative Rules, and what this is there's laws that are passed. Some of them were passed way before COVID. Obviously, most of them when people didn't know what pandemics are going to look like, and it allows the executive branch the ability to make rules. Promulgate rules, I believe is the word, based on the laws that we passed. Well, there has been some, yesterday, I believe it was, there was some pushback from JCAR on they gave the executive branch 30 days to determine how many they give them 30 days to say, show us where the law says you can do this.
Okay.
So we are finally getting some pushback. The last thing I'll say, and I actually had somebody say they're tired of hearing this, elections have consequences. if
in our state, they don't.
But you have to, if you don't like what's going on, if you don't think the General Assembly is standing up, then your ultimate deal is at the ballot box. So, yeah.
It is, though. But look what happened to California. California's going to hell in a handbasket. And he gets voted in. He cruises through the recall.
Yeah, but once again, I think it was about 60-40, right?
Yeah.
You didn't know who the other choice was. You had 10 other choices.
Yeah.
Not a fan of it. And yeah, in some places you feel like everything has to crash and burn before people start making some changes. But yeah.
I know. You want to hit on hospitalizations real quick? How we doing there?
Yeah, I do. And this goes to the county thing. Will County's doing pretty well.
Yeah.
If you look at Region 5, I think which is not Will County, that's way down south.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a county where their vaccination take-up rate is somewhere in the teens. They have a much higher positivity rate, and they have 0 ICU beds available.
Yeah.
That's a problem here. Will County, we have a pretty good mix of everything. In our region, we're tied with Kankakee. Going into the last couple weeks, we kind of spiked up and Kankakee stayed low. So it looks like that was the Delta surge hitting us. We've gone down. I think we're basically at the lowest point we've been at in weeks. Kankakee is having a little bit of the spike and then starting to level off and come down. So Will County seems to be doing really well. I feel good because we've been in school for a couple weeks now, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've been in school since
some of them since August 13th.
Yeah. So we're almost a month in school. You think you would see some of the reactions from that? I do think we are still going to see some of that. You always have when the weather gets cooler, that tends to be a little bit of an issue. But right now, knock on Formica or whatever this is. I'm hopeful that we either level off or continue to go down, because that would certainly be a good thing.
All right. Anything else on COVID you want to touch on before we go to a few questions?
Yeah. I posted a couple articles. The Atlantic. You ever read the Atlantic?
Absolutely.
It is, I would say, in terms of one of the most, you like to use the term moderate. And I got a new term that I'm going to throw out there. I like to use the term independent thinker. Mm-hmm. Independent thinker, you could be a conservative or a liberal, but come up with your own conclusions on things and not kind of fall in with the herd. The Atlantic, if you look at kind of the media bias things, is I think a slight left. It's near the middle, but a slight left. Well,
I know the article you're talking about, and I looked it up yesterday as soon as I found out, and it does lean left. You're right.
But they've been great on COVID and following the data and be willing to think independently. They've actually they've had articles about what to do with kids. They've also had articles on, I linked one here, about how masks has helped stop the spread with college kids. They also linked an article recently, a most reliable data point losing meaning. So it shows, they're showing the yin and the yang on everything. And this is a little bit of one of the silver linings is that, while hospitalizations used to be our best metric, right? When you look at caseloads, who's getting tested, how they getting tested, it's really a hard metric. Deaths, to a certain extent, is a very much a lagging indicator, mm-hmm. right? And then you also don't know about the comorbidities and everything else. Hospitalizations, when hospitalizations peak, that's kind of been something that's been a great indicator for how much COVID is spreading. But what they found in one of the studies that's linked in the article is that people are being hospitalized for COVID now, but the cases aren't as serious as they were at different points of the pandemic. So while hospitalizations have spiked and are starting to do better in the Chicagoland region, and we're certainly plateauing maybe on the way down in places like Will and DuPage and Kane, even with that, it might even be better than what we're seeing, because we're not seeing as many serious cases in the hospital that we saw in the beginning. So that's a little bit of a silver lining. I know my chief of staff, Debbie, actually sent me an article here this morning that talked about, was it the CDC, Deb? I believe it was the CDC, and I'll put that article up as well. They tested a whole bunch of blood samples, and they found a very high percentage. I want to say it was 80+% of the blood samples either had the vaccine or the natural antibodies. So those are good things that we're getting to that point.
Well, the Atlantic article also said that prior to January of this year, 36% of all COVID hospital cases, people weren't in for COVID. They didn't go in because they had COVID. They tested positive once they got in. And since January, the number is now 48%. Now, some of them probably went in because COVID made what they had worse, but still pretty remarkable that they didn't just check in for COVID reasons.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff, and I'm hoping.
Yeah.
I mean, we keep hoping, and I'm an optimistic person. I've been optimistic through this. We keep hoping that things are going to continue to get better. Eventually, they will. But there's certainly some silver linings. Last thing I'm gonna talk about with when I'm gonna challenge the listeners on this one. I might even do a Facebook post on this one, Deb. When we talk about how effective natural immunity is, I'll leave everybody with this. I don't know a single person who got COVID. I don't recommend doing it, by the way. But I don't know a single person who got COVID who got reinfected. I know tons of people who had breakthrough with the vaccines.
Okay.
So the idea, back to that school that was closed in Chicago, they're treating people with prior infection as if they're just unvaccinated and never had it. So the kids that have been vaccinated are allowed to go to school, but the people that can prove prior infection aren't. That's an example of not following the science, and that's an example of the nuance that we need to get to. If you can prove prior infection as a kid, you shouldn't be treated as if you're unvaccinated when the data is showing that you actually have stronger immunity than the vaccine. So I think we got a couple more minutes. I should probably transfer into a few questions.
Got a few questions here. I think vaccine mandate. You've made that clear. You're not for a mandate for vaccine. You would encourage people getting one, though.
Correct. Yes. Yep. That's exactly where I stand. Yeah.
Here's one, and this is kind of out of the blue. We're going through something kind of similar with this, my family right now. Where do you stand on euthanasia?
Man,
that's deep, man. For 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and that's what Illinois Questions is all about. And I saw that and forgot that. That's a tough one for me. I think I've had a lot of people and close friends and some close family members go through some tough times. Right now, I just side with life. It's hard for me to be able to legislate. If I'm going to make a mistake, I'm an error on the side of life as opposed to legalizing that. So I appreciate the question. I'm sorry I'm not giving you the answer that you want, but it would be hard for me to legalize that.
Okay. All right. And real quick, give me something with Mike Madigan. What's he doing nowadays? Any crazy stories? I know you need more than 80 seconds.
I'll give you one crazy story. One crazy story to end the show with. I had just been through a tough 2018 election. I want to say it was 10-1 spending. It might have been $4 million to $300,000. I was beat up. They spent $1 million against me the last week. Chicagoland TV. Network TV bought against me, which is just a rarity and kind of absurd for a state rep race. So I was made floor leader. So that's House Minority Whip. I'm the one that handles the debate on bills on the floor for the Republican Party. And the new governor, had invited both leadership teams to the governor, just have kind of a little get together cocktail party. And I'm not the most lively guy to party. I was talking to Aaron Harris about pensions, and I guess Mike Madigan was standing next to Representative Brady, and he pointed to me and said, "Who is that guy talking so much?" And Brady said, "Well, that's our floor leader, Mark Batinick." And then he just said, and walked out of the room.